The new European Commission President says that it will be impossible to reach a comprehensive deal with the UK by the end of the year. Do you then favour extending the transitional period?
If in 6 months' time it's obvious that the deal isn't going to be done by the end of the year, but Parliament has to have the chance to say, look, don't crash us out without a deal. Let us have a say in what happens next, because once we've left, that future relationship with the EU is all important, completely. We will leave the EU in 3 weeks' time, and therefore the debate about leave and remain goes because we will be outside the EU. But it doesn't mean that we stop challenging the government about what the future relationship should look like.
Did you know a third of British voters already believe Starmer won't last a year in office? This royal clash might be the catalyst that proves them right. In this video, I'll break down exactly what happened behind closed doors when Starmer met King Charles, and why constitutional experts are calling it the most serious rift between government and monarchy in modern history. The implications extend far beyond a simple disagreement, threatening both Starmer's premiership and Britain's post-Brexit economic strategy. And before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. What happens behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace when the Prime Minister and the monarch fundamentally disagree? We're witnessing it right now, and the implications for British democracy are far more serious than most people realize. The traditional weekly audience between King Charles and Keir Starmer began like any other, a ceremonial exchange of pleasantries followed by updates on government business. But last week's meeting quickly spiraled into uncharted waters. Palace insiders reveal that when King Charles raised legitimate concerns about the potential impact of US tariffs on British industry, Starmer's response was nothing short of dismissive.
You're right to say that we want to improve relations with the EU. We think we can get a better deal than the botched deal that Boris Johnson brought home, and we will work on that, understanding a very strong mandate now, a very strong mandate for change, for a different relationship with the EU, a different way of doing politics, and we go forward in that spirit. We do have to get on with implementing the important changes that are necessary under the existing arrangements that we've got, because we're not going to be able to get a better relationship unless we demonstrate a commitment to the relationship and the agreements that have already been put.
The Prime Minister essentially told His Majesty that foreign policy matters aren't the monarch's concern. One source close to the palace revealed this dismissal reportedly left King Charles visibly agitated, not just because of the personal slight, but because of the genuine economic threat he was attempting to highlight. What's particularly alarming is the scale of what's at stake. The king wasn't merely offering his personal opinion. He was armed with sobering assessments from Treasury officials. These reports indicate the devastating impact Trump's proposed tariffs could inflict on Britain, a potential £32 billion annual hit to exports that could jeopardize more than 400,000 jobs across manufacturing and financial services. Yet Starmer reportedly waved these concerns away as if they were trivial. This isn't just another day in Westminster. Constitutional experts are describing this confrontation as potentially the most significant clash between government and monarchy in modern British history, and it's not difficult to see why. The monarch, traditionally expected to remain above political fray, felt compelled to speak out about an imminent threat to national economic stability, only to be rebuffed by a prime minister seemingly unwilling to consider perspectives that challenge his predetermined position. King Charles has taken an unusually proactive stance on economic matters since ascending to the throne, viewing the stability of British industry as fundamental to the nation's well-being. His commitment to these issues stands in stark contrast to Starmer's apparent rigidity, a prime minister who seems increasingly disconnected from both institutional wisdom and public sentiment.
President Trump, he's so unusual because he's more open than any US president that I can remember, that tariffs are about politics as well as economics. It's his negotiating tactic of choice. He's most beautiful world. And Donald Trump does this with tariffs, otherwise known as import taxes. From 4 a.m. today, he slapped a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports from anywhere, if you anger him, like Canada did. And remember that as we watch the EU trying to impress Trump over Ukraine, days after taking retaliatory action against the US over these trade sanctions.
The atmosphere in the palace meeting room grew so tense that the scheduled hour-long audience reportedly ended after just 35 minutes, with neither side willing to find common ground. The king believes it is his constitutional duty to raise concerns about national stability, regardless of which party holds power, explained a senior royal correspondent. When that duty was questioned, it created an impasse that neither man was prepared to resolve in the moment. What's most revealing about this confrontation is how it fits into a broader pattern in Starmer's leadership approach. From dismissing concerns about immigration policy to sidelining economic warnings from business leaders, there's a recurring theme of rejecting input that doesn't align with his pre-established agenda. The difference this time is that he's alienated not just another stakeholder, but the head of state. Public reaction has been swift and largely unsympathetic to the Prime Minister. Opinion polls conducted in the aftermath show a significant shift in public sentiment.
In the United States, and Donald Trump has announced he is going to double the tariffs imposed on Canadian steel and aluminium.
Governor of Ontario on the weekend saying that he would impose tariffs on electricity coming into the United States. And so Donald Trump, in response, has issued this extremely lengthy tweet, or 50% on steel and aluminium. He seems to be taking no notice of the turmoil in the markets, which have lost all of their gains.
With many citizens viewing the king as the more reasonable voice in the debate over both Ukraine policy and economic stability. This represents a dangerous development for Starmer, whose approval ratings were already in dangerous territory before this royal confrontation. The exchange that reportedly ended the meeting speaks volumes. When Charles emphasized that his concerns were rooted in his duty to highlight threats to national stability, Starmer allegedly responded that the government alone determines what constitutes a threat to national interests. This fundamental disagreement over constitutional roles has now escalated beyond a private disagreement into what some are describing as a genuine constitutional crisis. Starmer's approach to this confrontation mirrors his handling of other contentious issues, from dismissing public concerns about crime investigation standards to ignoring warnings from economic experts about policy consequences. It reveals a leadership style increasingly disconnected from both traditional institutions and ordinary voters, a dangerous position for any prime minister, but especially one already facing significant challenges to his authority. History teaches us a sobering lesson about prime ministers who clash with established institutions early in their tenure. Those conflicts often become precursors to their political downfall. Starmer's confrontation with King Charles isn't merely about personality differences or procedural disputes. It represents a fundamental breakdown in Britain's constitutional balance that voters are watching closely. The timing couldn't be worse for Starmer, with critical decisions looming on Ukraine policy and the potential economic devastation from US tariffs. His leadership is under unprecedented scrutiny. Historical precedent suggests prime ministers who find themselves isolated from both institutional support and public opinion rarely recover their political standing. What happens in the coming weeks will likely determine Starmer's fate, as 1/3 of voters already anticipate his removal within a year. This royal conflict may well be remembered as the catalyst that accelerated his government's collapse. The question is no longer if Starmer can weather this storm, but whether the damage to his authority is already irreparable.